thanks everybody for coming. So, yeah, I'm Pascal Michael. So just a little introduction. I'm from the UK, if you can't tell already, and my university is the University of Greenwich in London, and I usually research psychedelics and near-death experiences, and that was my PhD ultimately. But I've been moving more and more into this field. So what I wanted to talk to you about today is the extratempestrial model. So that's Michael Master's model, extratempestrial model. Who is aware of that? Yeah? Okay. So what I want to do is elaborate on it. So I'm going to be elaborating on it in these different domains. So I'm going to talk more technically about what the extratempestrial model is, but basically it's the idea that these entities that we're interacting with, like in abductions, for instance, especially the greys, essentially, are like us from the future, right? And that comes up in the narrative a lot, but Michael Masters has just done such a masterful job at building a very coherent, I think, scientific model. He's a biological anthropologist of these greys and how it makes sense that they are us from the future based on our evolutionary trajectory, right? But there are some things which I don't think Masters especially fleshes out in a way that he could or mentioned, which is the idea of that AI is going to be important in our evolutionary trajectory, right? Even technology, how technology has affected our evolutionary trajectory thus far, that's not really accounted for in his model. I'd also talk a bit about evolutionary psychology, so how not only can we extrapolate from our evolutions thus far and see how we may appear in the future, which may be consistent with like the greys, but you can do a kind of similar thing with our psychology as well, right? How our minds have been changing, basically predicated on how our brains have been changing over time, and how that can look, how our minds can look potentially, speculatively, in the future, and whether or not that marries or not with the greys, how people encounter the greys. But there are different ways that people report the greys as well, so that will be interesting in terms of how our minds may change depending on factors in the future. How time may change, time manipulation, right? There's control over time. If these beings are us from the future traveling back in time, how that might have implications for something as fundamental as death. This isn't something that he touched on at all, which I think is actually really critical. And then ultimately, I got one little slide at the end really as to how all of this is effing bananas, and how that can affect us psychologically in terms of ontological shock. Okay, so extratempestrial model. So this is probably something that you guys are familiar with, which is the front cover of Communion, Stryber's Communion, right? Hello, Louise. And the cool thing about this is that Michael Masters has this story when he was younger. I think he was like 7 or something, and he looked in his bookshelf, and he saw this book, he saw Communion, but he had a simultaneous vision of this. And I didn't even contrive this. This is this funny kind of way that this worked out in terms of this image and that image. He had this image of seeing our evolution, these like previous versions of ourselves, kind of hallucinatorily like superimposing on his vision before his vision of Communion in front of him, and then he had the grey. He had wait, am I getting that right? He had was he looking at Communion? He was looking at, maybe he was looking at this image, this kind of classic image of our evolutionary trajectory, and then he basically had this kind of projected hallucinatory vision of the grey, and so basically he just intuited at this very early age that these entities have a fundamental connection to our evolutionary history and trajectory. That's the ultimate point. So these aliens are, quote unquote, maybe us from the future. So they're to an anthropologist, it's obvious to them because they're hominin, right? They have these fundamental hominin characteristics. They're part of our hominin homogeneous lineage. And you could say that's a kind of a projection of an anthropologist, because not only does he say that they're us from the future, but they're actually doing anthropological functions themselves. That's why they're coming back. Just like an anthropologist wants to study their previous forms of themselves, and these extraterrestrials have the perfect tool to do that. They have a time machine, right? And they come back and they're studying us. So you could say, well, that's what an anthropologist is going to say, isn't it? But it's still just, to me, I don't necessarily need to continue on with these next two slides. It's so, to an anthropologist, it's so blatantly obvious that these beings can't be anything but related to us and not extraterrestrial, in fact. So just some things which he mentions which kind of supports that is there's a particular study that was done on entity interaction, and the vast majority of them were humanoid, right? And then the second most popular, most common encountered ones were the greys. Then the third most popular were the tall greys, and I'll hopefully get onto the kind of potential explanation of these different types. And really interestingly, even the word humanoid derived from the context in which Europeans encountered other peoples, when they were coming over and colonizing, and they basically were mistaking people who were indeed human beings for non-humans, which is basically, he's saying, is exactly the same thing that's happening when we're encountering these other beings, that we just think that they're somewhat unlike us to a sufficient degree that they're not us, but in fact they are. And even, they're even referred to as being more evolved than us in a kind of more like figurative way, that they're more advanced. But maybe that's an actual literal thing which is happening. And of course, he's saying that this is the most parsimonious way of explaining this phenomenon, because you don't have to invoke these other. I mean, in Occam's razor, actually, if you look at the philosophical technical term definition for that term, is that you don't unnecessarily multiply entities to explain a phenomenon. And they're talking about entities in like a term, not in a literal way, but in this sense, you can describe it in a literal way. You don't need to rely on these beings being other entities in a way that's fundamentally other than us, because we know that we're here and all we're doing is extrapolating, right, that they may be related to us in terms of their being maybe from the future. So what he's saying as well is that this hominin like phenotype, the way that we look, our morphology, right, is very rare on Earth. It's very rare on Earth, let alone the entire universe. Okay, so yes, all these features, like we're quadrupedal, mammalian, we have our single head which has got our senses oriented around in 5 digits, all of that. That's all common to the primate family. But specific to the Homo sapiens, we're permanent bipedals. So we're the only one on the planet which are permanently bipedal, walking straight upright. We've got smaller teeth than our previous ancestors, smaller jaw, waist, we're like less hair. Our eyes came down, rounded brain case, all of these things. So they're specific to Homo sapien. And so he's basically making the case that if it's so rare on Earth, then it's going to be even less likely that these entities evolved in exactly the same way as us, because they also share these Homo sapien specific characteristics, but just in a more exaggerated way, in a way which matches if we were to extrapolate our evolution into the future, right? Which is, yeah. And also, he kind of mentions the interdimensional theory, right? It's what does that even mean, for one thing? It's kind of very ambiguous when people talk about that. But if it's going to be unlikely, that, if not impossible, that these entities were evolving these Homo sapien-specific features in the universe at large, it's going to be even less likely that basically the same selection pressures are going to exist in a different dimension that would lead to evolution being forced to generate an organism which has those same features, okay? Which I think is very compelling. But he does say that the dimension that they are moving in is time. So here's this really cool thing about Heidelbergensis, and that's one of our very distant ancestors that we evolved from. And he's basically saying that if Homo sapien now were to have a time machine and travel back in time and visit Heidelbergensis, they would they would have abduction reports, right? Well, if we were traveling back and abducting them, they would describe that encounter in an exceptionally analogous way to how we're describing our encounters with these beings. Right? They'd say things like, "Oh my God, these beings came out of nowhere, and they were similar to us, but not exactly the same. They had like a bigger head. They were more hairless. They were more diminutive in their stature, and they had all these crazy tools, these things that they were using. You know, we've only got these like sticks and stones, and they've got these inconceivable." Instruments that they're employing, and there's all different types of them. You know, some looked a bit like this, some looked a bit like that, which is again exactly like these contemporary reports that we have, with, like, for instance, with these different kind of cultures of these other beings that are being reported even, and even, for instance, when Homo sapien encountered Neanderthals, they were engaged, they were very aggressive in many cases, and we wiped them out, but we also interbred with them, and we can't ever know if there was like forced sexual intercourse and everything. We can't know that, but it's very probable, in fact. And so this is also things that we encounter in these abduction reports as well. This is just something which I just found curious, because when I was I just intuited that it might be something where these UFOs, for instance, often maybe around military bases, right, are flicking in and out of existence, and they're being encountered in those contexts, that maybe it could be accounted for by this extraterrestrial thing. It's a time slip. They're suddenly coming into our time in a way that may be aberrant, it may be deliberate. And I just thought that this report from the program, have you seen the program? It was aired the other night. Yeah? Have you seen the program? Yeah? So Jason Sands, right? So he talks about this. I'm not going to read it all out here, but basically he claims that he was near Nellis Test Range in Nevada, and then basically he sees this figure who looked like this. He later drew. So such small ears that maybe they were not even there, and big, much bigger, black kind of eyes, and appeared to be in distress. Tried to communicate to him and wanted help to repair his craft. So I just thought that was kind of an intriguing thing, which might be supportive of this idea, in the sense that their time manipulating technology has kind of gone awry. Their craft had broken, and that's why they had this time slip. As a totally speculative kind of thing that I thought was consistent, only because Masters mentions that there are some people who are suggesting that these extraterrestrials, like these time machines, are like military in nature. I'm just going to skip over that for a sec. Hominin evolution, so a bit more about that. So why this is from Mars Attacks, this dude. Why is there this concurrent enlargement of the eyes and the head, the cranium in these greys? And what's really interesting is Master talks about the fact that they co-evolve, which makes sense. So their size and capacity is correlating over time. And it's interesting that actually there seems to be a projection that I don't know exactly how they calculated this, but the maximum processing capacity of the brain is maybe 3 times what it is now. So it'd be interesting to kind of ask these abductees to see what the average size of their heads and cranial cases are, to see where they kind of are in terms of their processing capacity, what's possible. And even the pupils and intelligence is actually correlated as well. So again, like just tying together the eyes and the capacity of the brain, because the eyes and the brain they share the same gene control. Also, the idea that they're grey, right? The greys, believe it or not. And so domestication could be involved with this. We know that like, for instance, with urbanized foxes, they've been domesticated essentially in a way, and they lose the particular physiological mechanisms to produce more of their pigment, and they become grayer. But also, it might not necessarily just be due to that, but we don't know. There's the kind of the ultra-terrestrial kind of theory and things which may be consistent with the extraterrestrial in some way, which hopefully I'll get on at some point. if these entities were evolving underground as well, or in a way which also may be consistent with the kind of with an extraterrestrial model as well, and that you can potentially reconcile all of these models, and so they are evolving in low light conditions, that may also account for the grey pigmentation. This is interesting as well. So the idea that the greys are obviously massive, they have these massive heads, but they're more diminutive in their general, in the rest of their bodily structure, right? They have like these slim weights, they're gracile. So evolutionarily, we incorporated meat into our diet about 2.5 million years ago. And then we started scavenging for meat. And then we invented hunting. And then we invented fire. And so we were eating meat. It was pre-processed by the cooking of the fire. The fire allowed for greater socialization, okay? And those things especially in the major kind of theories of our evolution were really important for the growth of our brain. And agriculture as well, and domestication. So that basically just catalyzed this even more, led to cerebralization, okay? The fact that our brains are getting bigger and bigger. And it also meant these same sequence of events over time, that our teeth got smaller and our jaws got smaller and we had fewer teeth. So again, we can extrapolate all this into the future, and it can account for the mouth of the greys being very, very small, the jaw being very pointed, and the mouths being barely noticeable. So that's called and so the idea about the gut, the gracility, them becoming narrower as well in the waist, that's called the expensive tissue hypothesis, the idea that we couldn't necessarily have both big brains and big guts. And so evolution basically chose to favor the evolution of the brain, basically, where our guts got smaller, which was allowable because of the changes in our diet, and our brains got bigger.
How do we know it's aliens? Couldn't that just be military aircraft? They now believe there's one planet for every star in the universe. There are already 8.4 billion artificial intelligence systems. Who could have built that 10,000 years ago? Where did you find the source for that? Could AI truly become sentient?
For a unique, in-depth, and rational look at these topics with the world's leading experts, check out Beyond Contact on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts. Find us at contactinthedesert.com.